questions, and we'll get back to you later on. So today we're going to be taking a look, we took a look at workflow basics last time, and I want to do a recap of that before we move into today's topic. So as we saw, workflow is a method for routing documents for review or approval. It's a linear process, so we're moving from task to task. We're not doing sort of, any conditional workflow. We're not doing if-thens. We're sort of going from task 1 to task 2 to task 3. We can have them as very static or very dynamic. So we can set options to them so that the user can configure those elements, or we could also have it so that it's very fixed and locked into place. So we have options going either way. It's an auditable activity step, so we can see what happened with each step of the activity. And it's a template-based process. So we're running a document through a process, and then we're attaching that process to the document type. So we're attaching the workflow template to the schema to make sure it's running through properly. Today, we're going to be looking at some advanced workflow functions, and really we're going to be exploring a lot of the different options, and there's going to be a lot of hypotheticals being thrown at you here. So I want you to think in broad terms about what you're looking to do for reviews and approvals, what that might actually mean for your internal processes. So when we look at these additional functions, really looking for adding value to this workflow process as you're running it through. We're going to look at some of the optional settings that are available within the software. We're going to look at some of the workflow template options. If you were here at our last session, you may remember I said we're going to cover this next time. This is the next time. We're going to take a look at some of these different template options that we can build, including the role of the observer, and make sure we can cover that, and discuss what it's like to postpone approval and what the difference is between approve, not approve, and postpone when it comes to the approval process. And we also want to make sure we look at the workflow schema options. So some things that when we add this document to the template, what we're going to do in order to make sure the workflow gets initiated. And then finally, we'll take a look at the workflow status report. So lots of information in there. If you're watching this on video and you're wondering, oh, I wonder where this is going to be built, please make sure you've seen the other part of our workflow demo first, because a lot of this will help to make a lot more sense. And so with that, let's take a dive into the software. So I'm going to bring up my FileHold system here. Those of you should be familiar with the desktop application. And before I go into anything else, you may be wondering about some of the options that were available. So I'm going to access that by coming up to my administration. I'm going to go to my web administration panel. Yes, I could have gone over there myself, but this just jumps me straight over to there and makes it a lot more useful. I'm just going to collapse everything over here, and we're going to go to our library configuration, settings, and workflow. So these are some of the general settings that we have built into this. And I just want to take us through what a lot of these are. We're not going to touch this bottom one down here, which is PDF converter settings. We're going to be covering this not in our next session, but the session following that when we talk about sign-off sheets. So if you want to create a sign-off sheet from the workflow as you run it through, that's where we're going to be taking a look at that, and we'll get into the PDF converter settings then. But for now, let's keep focused on the top part. So first of all, the following setting determines if one workflow or multiple workflows are initiated when documents are selected. So we can run one document through one workflow, makes sense. We can run multiple documents through one workflow, or run multiple workflows with multiple documents. So 3 documents, 3 workflows, or 3 documents, 1 workflow. I have this set to prompt user because I personally find that more effective, but if you have people who are constantly sending multiple workflows when they only meant to send one, you can change that default setting. The following setting determines what user interface is available for completing tasks. I have this set to new only, and frankly, it's what I'd suggest using. There is a classic version in there, but it's going to be going away with the future version of FileHold. So get used to the new settings now and start using the new only, because it'll be a lot easier for you. Ignore document version ownership when initiating workflows or sending courier transmissions. When a workflow is going to be launched, without this selected, it means that only the version owner, only whoever owns that version of the document, can initiate the workflow. This takes that away and means that anybody can initialize a workflow in a document. Now, I use this extensively in my test environment, but you could quite logically say to me, but we don't want to use it that way, and I totally believe you. So if that's the case, you might want to ignore that version ownership. In my case, that's how I want it. Enable editing document metadata when a workflow or courier approval transmission is active. We saw last time that when we put a document into workflow, we're prevented from making any changes to it. We're preserving the document in that state moving forward. This option will allow you to edit the document metadata. Otherwise, you'd be locked out from that. And again, that's really useful if one of your tasks is prompting someone, update a value within the metadata, put a PO number on an invoice, or indicate which department this SOP is going to be relevant to. Those kind of tasks will be part of the workflow, and this allows you to keep that into there. Enable checking out documents when workflow is active. Now, this does not give universal right to check out a document when a workflow is active. What it means is you can enable the checkout feature. Without this selected, the checkout option disappears on the workflow template. So because I had this selected, I'm able to use the checkout option. So if you want your workflow only to deal with documents that are in a locked state, by disabling this, no one can check out a document in workflow. With this enabled, you still have to add that into the template, but it's how you enable that. Enable optional passwords and workflow templates. I was saying last time that FileHold has two kinds of tasks. We have review tasks, we have approval tasks. A review task is please have a look at something. An approval task is please have a look at something and sign off on it when you're done. That sign off is your password. So by allowing you to have optional passwords and workflow templates, I could have an approved task that doesn't require a password, or equally, I could have a review task that does require a password. Otherwise, we don't do that. For my system, I leave that deselected because I like the distinction of an approval task requires password, a review task does not. But again, it's your system. You can configure it that way. And our last one down here is enable external signatures. This has to do with our integration with Adobe Sign, and coming in FileHold 17, our integration with DocuSign. So with both of those, we need to enable the external signatures, and there's a configuration in this that our support team will help go through with you as part of that package when it comes in. So these are our workflow settings, and I just wanted to take a moment to show you these because I think they're really important just to kind of take a moment and observe. While we're here, I'm going to hop over to our workflow templates down below, and I want to show you some of the optional settings that we have in here. Now you see I've got my different workflows, but I'm not going to bother with that. We're just going to make a new template so I can show you some of the settings in this. Now I believe last time we talked about custom naming that we can put onto a workflow. Now why this is important is because I'm going to come over here to the My Tasks, and here I've got two examples of workflows that don't have any sort of naming convention into it. I've got a review task, which is just a description of the workflow, and an approved task, which is just the description of the workflow. So in both of these cases, it's not telling me anything about the document itself. It's not telling me what it is. In order for me to see what the document is, I have to select it, and it comes down here and shows me the document. So I'm going to go back over into our settings, and I'm going to show you that we have, under our custom naming, we can put a name onto these. So in addition to, for example, taking the workflow name, so let's turn on automatic rename. So I can choose the workflow name just like we saw there before, and then I can take the document name. Now the document name is going to be the first document in a series. So if you had 50 documents, don't worry, you're not going to have a giant long name. It's going to be the first document in the series. You can also choose any of your available metadata fields. Now you'll notice that here our metadata fields are, this is my entire system one. So I've got tons of different kinds in here, including ones that I'll probably never use again. You are not required to use a name in the workflow for, there's no association between the schema that you're using and the metadata field in this case. You can just select one that may happen to be common. Then some of the more popular system values are up here, such as the workflow initiator, document version, document ID, a custom text string, which you can put into this. So again, you've got some other options onto this. So this is perfectly sufficient for now, and I'm just going to call this webinar. So I've got a name onto this. Now there's a bunch of other options into here that we didn't discuss last time because these are sort of some of our advanced modes. So we saw in our last session, we were bringing a document through a review and approval process. This is what's going to allow a lot of manipulation of this. So this is going to make this process very dynamic, very plastic, very malleable. First, of course, we've got our allow initiator to define. So if I wanted, for example, somebody to enable the initiator to give a description for this workflow, I could click that, and then when they launch the workflow, they can put their own description into this. Really useful for making a more fluid process for when documents run through. Moving on further down here, you can see right now there's no schemas as we're creating one. Until we save this, we won't be able to attach it, so that's fine. Initiator can modify this workflow, add, edit, or delete activities at initiation. So this is very powerful. This means that whoever kicks this off can actually remove steps from the process or add entire workflow tasks on their own. If you have a super user or somebody who really knows workflow, this is a fantastic way to empower them to be able to add that content into here, make it manipulated, add whole activities, really brings a lot of power to it. However, we can also understand that in a lot of cases, we don't want that because we need a more regulated process. We're looking for a more controlled application of workflow. And if that's the case, you wouldn't want this enabled. Reset all activities when adding documents or checking in new versions to a postponed workflow. So we've got an option down here, which we're going to see in just a moment, called approval, where I can allow postponement of a document. I'm going to explain what that means later. When we postpone, we can actually reset all the activities so that we need to start over again from any of those activities so that we can make sure that that approval happens with a new version. So someone changes the document, or when they're adding more documents in, we can reset those activities based on that new document that's coming in. If they don't make changes to the document or they don't add documents, then we're not resetting the activities. So this is good for very tight control, especially if the postponement means they might be adding content into the system. So this is useful. Hide the document version until the workflow is approved. Let's head back down into FileHold, and I'm going to head over here to my repository where I've got some older invoices in the system. And you'll see that some of these documents, like this one here, have a little H beside them. This document is hidden, so the only people who can see this are system administrators or the document owner. So they're the only, otherwise this document is hidden from the other users. Now the reason for that is because it's been hidden until it's been approved. So we're putting an additional level of control in this document to say we're not going to allow this to be released until it's gone through an approval cycle. Now this is very useful for new document versions. So for example, you've got an SOP and you've run that standard operating procedure through different departments. You've all got agreement and sign off for it. Now a year later, you want to make a change to it. When we make that change, we may not have the sign off on all the areas. So rather than print off the document and route it around, we can use workflow to hide the current version, expose the prior version, and then have it reviewed by users so that they can sign off on it as they want to. All right, let's head back over to our menu. So here I can invoke this at the workflow level. So when I use this and I add this template to the to any schema, I'm going to hide all unapproved versions of that document. It happens automatically. So it's not like the documents that you had exposed are now hidden. So again, be careful with this because it might mean you'll have to go back and rubber stamp a lot of documents that are already working for you. But this is very powerful for ensuring that only approved documents are visible to most users in the system. Convert main documents to electronic records at completion. Okay, let's head back over to the library. So over here you see I've got some records. Now we know it's a record because when I select the document, I don't have the ability to check the document out. Even though I'm the owner, I have a right to delete it, but I don't have a right to check it out. So because it's a record, it's been preserved into this state. And if I open up my information on it, we'll see it's got an approval mark. And that's because this document, once it was approved, was converted to a record. It does not change the document. It simply changes how FileHold accesses it. So it was a Word file, it is a Word file, but now that Word file can't be checked out. If I wanted to make a modification to it, I'd have to bring it in as a new version of the document, or as an administrator, I could go into its settings over here and I could change its format to a document. And by doing that, it releases it. Now it's able to be checked out. So we can see it's got a checked out status on this. This does not change its approval status. It is still an approved document. I haven't modified this in any way. I've just ensured that now I've converted it back into a document. So we can use workflow to automatically approve, to convert those documents upon completion of it. So this doesn't happen at a particular point. It's just once the workflow is complete, only then do we do a conversion. Very powerful for preserving documents once they've gone through an approval process. So remember that if I check out a document that's been approved and I check it in as a new version, I'm going to remove that status of approved. So if I have something that's delicate or took negotiations or whatever context, I want to make sure that document can't be changed. That's a powerful way to do that. Email notifications down here. So this is the friendly tap on the shoulder that somebody has an upcoming overdue task. So I can notify 1 day and 0 hours before for tasks that are going to be overdue. So this is the friendly warning, you've got a task coming up. And then I can repeat that notification if I wanted to every number of hours. So I can say that every 6 hours, I'm going to send you an auto-nag reminder that you need to take care of this. Again, if you're dealing with people who are constantly getting their workflows done, I'm sure everybody who's on the call today, we're all working with colleagues who are 100% on time with their documents, that are never late, never forget to do things. But in the off chance that they may, you may have an individual in the office who is occasionally late with their materials, this is a nice reminder that you can give them. Super gentle, just sends them a note, gives them a heads up. Observers. An observer is somebody on the workflow who is going to be watching the document and want to be notified when it's completed its workflow, and may want to occasionally come in and check what's happening on the workflow, but they're not going to be an active participant. They're going to be able to turn off a lot of their own internal notifications for it. So again, you can assign anybody to as an observer, but of course we still have to respect our rules of access. So if I was not able to see the document's cabinet, folder, or schema, I wouldn't be able to see the document, and therefore I couldn't be an observer. But at this level, I can add anybody into it. And this is a great example of where you might want to make this, you might want to be able to make this modifiable by the person who's launching the workflow, because then they can add somebody else in as an observer if they wanted to casually, so they don't have to worry about doing a formal process. And allow document version owner to observe the workflow. Very useful if this isn't their document that they're putting into workflow. So user X puts a document out there, user Y launches it into workflow, and they can say, I'm going to make the document version owner observe it. So user X would now be able to come into FileHold and be listed as an observer. So they can see the workflow status report, they can get notifications when it's completed its workflow, etc. All right, those are the general settings that we have over here. I'm going to scroll down now and go into our workflow activity 1, where we have approval, and I want to talk about the postponement of a workflow. So I'm going to click on Allow Postpone Approval. So first comment to make, Postpone Approval is only available for an approval action at this point. So we can't attach this to a review task. If we're asking someone to do, if we're allowing someone to do postponement in a workflow, then we're going to make sure, we need to make sure that it's an approval task to do this. So we can't use this on a review activity. Now here's why this can be useful. And it's sort of a subtlety, so I'm just going to explain what this means. I'm going to go back over into my desktop application, and let's just see over here if I have any documents that, so you can see over here I've got an approval status of different measures. So I've got pending approval, I've got approved, not submitted for approval. A document that's not submitted for approval is presumably going to be hidden because it has yet to go through the system, because I've got my hidden setting turned on. So this will automatically hide it. Most of my documents in here are approved. Now, if I had a document that I didn't want to accept to move forward, I could say not approved. A not approved document cannot be put through workflow again. You must check the document out as a new version and check it back into the system before workflow can be launched on it, presumably so you can correct whatever changes there were was why the document was not approved. And of course, the audit record will allow someone to make a comment onto there to show why they rejected the document. Now, all that's the background for it. Right now, with what we're seeing here, we have 4 states that a document can be in. Not submitted for approval, hasn't gone out yet, pending approval, currently being cycled for approval, approved, or not approved. There are often cases where a document is perfectly valid, there's no issues with it, it's 100% fine, but we still need to postpone the workflow for the approval for whatever reason. We need to put a pause on it. There are 3 conditions that FileHold allows you to build into the document. So let's go back over to our web panel, and I just want to show you what happens here with our cycle. So before I do that, I actually have to come back over to here, and I have to build my first task, and you're going to see why in a second. I'm going to go add activity. So we're adding our second activity over here, and I'm going to allow approval postponement, and then it's going to give me the option of select 1 or more steps to restart from. And I'm going to click onto this, and it's going to give me at least 3 options. The reason it's going to be 3 options is because I have a 2-task workflow. If I had a 1-task workflow, it would be a single option here, and that would be allow participant to create a one-time review and return to workflow initiator. So allow participant to create a one-time review. I want someone to have a look at this for me. Maybe this is an invoice that came in and I want to route this over to the salesperson and say, are you sure this is a valid invoice? I want to make sure. Or maybe it's an SOP and you want to bounce this by legal quickly to make sure everything's fine with it. Or maybe it's a manufacturing order and you need engineering to do one more check because you're not sure about one of the numbers. Whatever the reason is, you can allow the participant, whoever has been assigned this task, to be able to do a one-time review activity. So they can create an ad hoc review activity and send it over to somebody else for review. Not an approval, because we're not going to do a sign-off. We're simply asking them to do a review task at that point that then becomes part of the permanent audit record. Our second one here is return to workflow initiator. This is essentially not rejecting it. That's not the quite right way of putting it. This is the way of saying, you know what? We're just going to send this back to you, and you can have the new version of this. We need to work on this for whatever reason. And there's opportunity, just like there is with an approval or not approved, to be able to interact with it, be able to put your comment into it as to what you want it to look like. And our last one here is send it to another step of activity. And that's why I built that second step there, so I could show the first one to send it back to. I named it test, so it's named test on this here. So it shows that. So what this allows you to do is, let's say you had a 15-step workflow, and at step 14, there's an issue with the document. Rather than sending it back to the initiator, I can send it back to one of my prior steps of activity. So instead of having to send it all the way back to the beginning by marking as not approved and forcing someone to check the document out and check it back in, I could simply postpone the approval and send it back to a prior test. Now let me just double check something here quickly. I'm just going to cancel this, and we're going to go over, and I want to have a quick look at my workflow templates. So we're going to go over here. You'll notice I'm switching between the desktop application and the web client. I find that a really useful tool to be able to look for information on these documents. I think it's a very simple way to find the content that we're looking for. So I want to find my AP invoices historic, invoice approval, and in this one here I don't have approval postponed selected. So I'm going to select this one quickly and say OK to it, and I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to grab one of my documents. Here's one that's not been submitted for approval. We're going to right click onto this, and we're going to put this document off into my invoice approval cycle. So this screen's going to pop up here. I'm sending this to myself for demo purposes. We've got a new task that's been assigned over here. Now here's why having that rename is a much better function, because I know which one I was looking at. In this case, I'm going to use the date and time to tell me which one. And we're going to now submit our approval. So the same window is going to pop up as before. Just as a note, I could have also done this through the web client, doing the same thing with right-clicking into it in order to bring that open. But in this case, we're going to use the desktop application. So we're just waiting for the window to load. It's a freshly rebooted system, so it takes a moment for this to cache. So before we saw it last time that we had the approve, we had the not approve, and now we've also got postpone. So we have this as a new option. When I select this, it's going to let me know what I want to do with it. And you see that I can choose what activity to do. In this case, return to workflow initiator is all I enabled. So just like before, I can put my comments into here or attachments, and I must enter in my password in order to complete this screen. So again, it's giving me all those same tools to notify people and inform them, but I'm not stopping the document from going through workflow. I'm not saying no one else can do anything with this. I'm not forcing them to do some busy work by rechecking it. I am truly just saying, right, nobody's going to be able to, we're not going to complete this workflow process until we complete our approval. So postponing is a very powerful way to route a document for additional steps of activity. If you think about it, if you were to put a review activity into each one of these, you could, in theory, have 40 tasks built into a single workflow. So you could keep routing it for review tasks and routing it for review tasks. But in this case, we're obviously not going to be doing that. We just have a single task where we have one allow approval postponement. So if you've not used Postpone before and you find yourself rejecting too many documents and not approved and having to go through the process of restarting the workflow later, Postpone is a great solution for that. It's also a great way to empower somebody to do that one-time review activity. It does require that people understand a little bit about how to run a workflow, but that's minimal training. And of course, that's always available from us at training@filehold.com. Shoot me a note and let me know if you need a little bit more intensive looks at postponement. Okay, looking at our next subject here I wanted to look at was options in the workflow schema. So far I've been looking at options in the workflow template. So about workflow, now let's jump over and take a look at the schema. Again, I think I touched on this last time, but it's worth revisiting. So instead of going into workflows, now we're going to go into our document schemas, and we're going to take a look at any one of these. Let's take a look at our invoices over here, and we're going to go over to our workflow, and here we have some controls over this. So first of all, we can see what workflow templates we've associated with this. In this case, 2 templates, one for invoice approvals and one for SmartSoft Capture invoices for review. So 2 different processes. I've got an auto start function onto this, which I've engaged. So in this case, I'm asking to automatically start the following workflow template when adding or checking in a document of this type. So in this case, start the SmartSoft Capture invoices for review automatically. Now, this is something I built in so that when I bring a document over from SmartSoft, When I'm bringing in my zonal OCR scan document that's been tagged with information, I automatically run it into workflow so I don't have to manually go through there and trigger them if I want to. Now, it's been asked, what happens if I have multiple documents that I'm bringing in from Capture? I'm bringing in a batch of 20 documents. I probably wouldn't automatically start a workflow there because especially if they're all going to be in one single workflow task, I might say, do not start this workflow automatically, and I'll manually start the workflows when I have the batch that I want. On the other hand, if I need individual sign-off on each of those documents, it makes a lot more sense to do this. As soon as a document comes in, we automatically start it. If these documents are more iterative, if we're going to be running these through revisions and doing tweaks on them, then in that case, we might want to automatically start the workflow when adding or checking in a new document of this type. So we're constantly updating it when it comes in. We typically see this being used for any sort of control documents or instructions, standard operating procedures, those kind of documents into there. Then finally down here, we've also got another option to hide versions of the documents until the document has been approved. So we can put that hide configuration on the workflow template and apply it to the schema, or we can put it on the schema and apply it to the workflow template. One note, you want to make sure if you're using this setting that there is at least one workflow template associated with the document type that has at least one approval activity. Because yes, you can build it in such a way so that you can actually permanently hide the documents because you don't have an approval task that's been built into any of them. That is allowed into this. It basically makes it a permanently hidden task into it. However, this can still be useful for being able to ensure that when you did add that template later, you could do a mass approval onto them if you wanted to. So adding it into the template automatically locks it, but it becomes a little bit more difficult to track down because you have to go into the workflow template as opposed to the schema, which I'm doing here. So it's dealer's choice. Both of them are totally valid, and both of them will work very well. These are the configuration settings that we have on the schema template. So you can do this anytime you make a change to your settings into this, whether I'm building workflow templates, whether I'm applying them to schema, whether I'm changing some of my settings into this, as soon as I'm done, hit apply, because then you make sure that you apply the rules that you've done, then hit OK. If you've applied it and there's been no error messages, you know it should be fine. And now you can go over here to File, and you should do just a quick refresh, because the refresh is going to make sure that your whatever you've entered into that for your settings is now going to work in. So I just do a quick refresh all, and it makes sure that whatever settings I have into there are working. If you change the template so much that you may actually have to change the interactive screen, so when I right click onto, sorry, not over here, when I'm over in my library, and I right click onto this, we sometimes don't see all of the workflow options until we close and restart the FDA. So that's another point of context there, something else to keep in mind for updating it. So just a couple of pieces of advice there for getting into those. All right, so we've looked at all the different settings and configurations, all those different ways of dealing with some advanced functions for the workflow. Now, let's take a look at our status report again. So we saw over here we had our workflow status report, and it's a list of the workflows that you've been a participant in. Because this is your list, you can clear any ones that were completed or clear the ones that were canceled. This is also where you can do things like restarting a workflow. Let me explain. I have a document, it's gone through the workflow, it's currently going to, and it was not approved, it's now sitting as not approved. I might be able to restart the workflow from the not approved document. So rather than starting a new workflow, I'm just going to continue the one that we did before, and I'm going to restart its cycle again. We can rename a workflow in case I want to be more specific with things. We can cancel it from here. Again, if you're not the workflow owner, you won't be able to cancel it, but it needs to be part of your status report in order to do that. So for instance, if I open this up here and I choose my task, I may be able to select the document and cancel the workflow from here. So this is as an initiator, as a system administrator, as a cabinet administrator who owns the cabinet or better. These are all options to be able to cancel workflows. Clearing completed basically cleans up my list. Override the task. Okay, so this is, I need to have the task selected to use this. So I can select to override the task in order to force it to be another status. So someone's working on it, maybe they have it reserved. I can, with this, I can undo their reservation. I can also override to take that one over. Delegating the task. Sometimes you want to send this to somebody else, and if that's the case, I can assign another user to it. So I'm going to type in Andy. We're going to select Andy's name. And now I've assigned this task to Andy. And you'll see that it's Andy will be the signature, but it's on behalf of me. So it doesn't abdicate me from responsibility. It simply means it's not my initials on it, but Andy is doing it on my behalf because I've assigned it over to Andy. It's also where I can print my lists and I can do an export of this if I needed to. So again, some of the details onto this. So this is the standard workflow status report. If I right click onto this, or sorry, not right click, if I go up to my administration, I can go into my workflow management and I can see my fuller status report. Now, unlike what we were seeing before, this is now the full status report for all workflows that I have access to as a system administrator. I'm going to be able to see everything. So if you're a sysadmin, this is a powerful tool. Now, I believe this will still let you get access to this, but it won't be for all workflows. It'll only be for the ones that are visible to you. And by visible, I mean the ones that you are an active participant in, document owner thereof. So it's going to be a more limited list. Now, this is a filtered list. So if I want to, I can show the filter options and I can pin or unpin different selections. And I've got lots of fine tuning that I can do into this. So for example, changing what the workflow status is. So instead of being in progress, completed, canceled, approved, not approved, approval postponed, pending approval, reviewed, pending review, etc. So I've got lots of different options that I could do into this. We've got completed between, so I could choose what the percentage is. So I see all the workflows that are at least 50% complete. That is 50% of the tasks, not 50% of the participants. Date started, when the workflow is initiated, and I can use a range for that. The due date, and again, I can use a range for that. Document name contained. So if I'm looking for all the ones that have INV in it, I could run that as a search and see all those related. You'll notice the checkbox selects automatically and start to put information into it. And again, here's the same thing. I could say, show me the workflow name contains approval. So maybe I've got similar sounding process names. I could use that to widen my net out. Who initiates the document into workflow. So I can choose my name from the list here, and then it's only the ones that I'm involved of as the initiator. Workflow template name contains, instead of the workflow name, because remember we can change the naming conventions onto it, I just want the ones that have a template name. We're looking for all the ones that are process 3 workflows, and I can bring that into here. Refined by document schema. So you see I've got a complete list of all the various schema that I have into here. I can choose the one out of this that is related to that, that schema where the workflow template's applied to. Current activity participant is Andy, or whichever other user I want. So I can choose one of the users or another one. Current activity overdue or due in X number of days. So either is a status of overdue or it's going to be overdue in 2 days. Again, lets me search the stuff that's already overdue and proactively engage with the stuff that's going to be overdue. Workflow activity contains activity type, so I can say approval, review, or even for external signature, because again, we're going to use this workflow engine as part of our external signature process. Workflow GUID and workflow task GUID. So each of these get a generic universal identification code, and so that GUID or GUID is going to be available as a searchable item. If you want to know what those look like, they're not pretty. Let's just come back over to here. Let's look at our administration reports, and we'll go to our user activity. So we'll go to document usage log, and we're just going to apply the filter. And you'll see that here's workflow initiated, and this is an example of a GUID. So it allows me to say this is a unique identifier just attached to this. It's a FileHold generated sequence number. It's outside of your control, and no, you're not expected to remember what that is, but I just want to point out that's what that's referencing. And then finally, we've got document ID equals. So if you know that it's document number 1234, I can see if there's a workflow task that's associated with it. So you can fill in any of these variables that you want. So let's just turn a bunch of these off, and let's go here and let's do 1234 and see if there's any workflow tasks that are associated with document 1234. And there aren't, which is not an unusual thing to see. Or I can say, instead of that, I want to see what documents are currently in progress. So I want to see what's happening within the system. And I've got 3 documents right now that are pending approval, which all happen to be tasks that I'm somehow related to. So again, it's showing me that broader context into this. We can also get access to this report over here, again, in the full administration menu. You will have seen workflow management. So I've got my workflow status report. Again, we've got all the same options over here. So if I show those filter options, it's whatever I've got turned on or off. So I can trigger that from here. It's also where from up top here, I've got some additional functions like ability to restart, cancel, rename, clear completed, clear canceled, etc. So a lot of those same functions we saw on the standard tasks. I've also got a workflow dashboard over here, and the dashboard kind of gives me a summary of what's happening right now. In this case, I'm looking at total workflows. These are all the workflows that ran through. We get a nice graphic down here, and see I can move my mouse over top and show the pie charts. And what's great about this is that if I select one of these, it'll actually basically launch and show me that status report of everything that's available within that area. So in this case, I had one document in the pie slice, and here it is over here. So back to the workflow dashboard. I can also use this to filter, so I can say instead of total workflows, show me all the ones that were completed. And now I can see the historical record of all my completed workflows when it refreshes. So these are my completed workflows that I currently have in process. So again, lots of background and information that's available for me, usually doing it by date range. So in this, so I can include that into there or include overdues, etc. So I can bring those other documents into it. So again, lots of muscle that I can bring into this from a dashboard. This is available to administrators so that you can kind of see what's happening globally. Workflow delegation, if you want to know who's participated, who's initialized, this is a great place to go for that. So I can workflow participants, and I can apply the filter, and these are all the delegations that were done, including the one that we just did a few minutes ago. So we're going to see that as our timestamp right on there. So we've got that indicated for this document here. We can see what happened with its particular delegation. So I can get into this if I need to see delegation, which is an important thing as an administrator. All right, we're nearly done here. The last thing I want to show you is usually totally overwhelming, so I only show it towards the end. And this is the options you have for what you're going to see for workflow. So I'm back in the desktop application, up here under File, Preferences and Setting, Workflow Preferences. Now, these are not workflow preferences in the sense of workflow preferences for the system. These are for the user. So the top here is notify me by email when the following occurs, and then you can choose which of these you don't want to be notified on. So for example, a task is assigned or delegated to me. You might say, I don't need to get that notification. I'm going to turn it off because I'm getting too much email. We completely understand. A task assigned to me is overdue. Okay, you may not want to know that because you're going to get taken care of. You don't need the automatic reminder. That's fine. A task assigned to me is overridden. Somebody else takes it out, so you no longer have to do it. You can turn off that notification. You could turn off all of these notifications if you want to. It's your system. I'm not there to watch over you. You can do whatever makes the most sense. However, I want to point out for administrators who are here, maybe someone just heard, wait a minute, people can turn off their own notifications. I don't think so, because they will start to ignore things. No problem. Client options, workflow preferences, notification when a task is going to be assigned or delegated to a user. Yeah, you're going to get that notification. It's going to be enabled, and I'm going to enforce it. So now you can't even turn it off if you wanted to. So we're going to save that as a setting, and we've now enforced that within the system. So now if I come back over to here, and I'm going to close this out, and let's just reopen those. Our workflow preferences, you'll see that I can't deselect a task assigned. So now I have to get that notification. I can't pretend I didn't see it because I had the notification turned off. So I'm enforcing that. And you've got lots of options here, and it gets very detailed what you can do. So for example, workflow is restarted for a workflow I initiated. So you initiated it, someone else restarted it, you're going to get a notification on that. One-time review act is added to a workflow I'm an observer of. One-time review activity is added to a workflow I initiated. Again, lots and lots of details into here. Down below is the courier notification preferences, which you can turn on and off. And then we've got your email alert frequency. So for example, if it's something that you're going to get your notices on, maybe you can say, you know what, I just want a daily summary of my emails so that I don't get bombarded with workflow notifications each and every day. The last thing on here is task delegation settings, so I can automatically delegate tasks assigned to me, and I can find another user. So I'm going to choose Andy in this case, and we say fine, because I'm going to go to Tahiti for a month, and while I'm gone, Andy's going to take care of my workflows for me. So I can turn on my own delegation settings. No, there is no way for a system administrator to turn on delegation settings for somebody else. Each user has to initialize their own delegation settings. Yes, we're looking at it for future releases, but just for now, each user has to delegate their own tasks. Otherwise, their tasks will be overdue, which is fine, because a user can, or an administrator can come into the workflow, and then using the workflow status report could take one of the tasks, and then they could take that task and assign it to another user by overriding it. So they could send it to somebody else if necessary, so we don't lose it in the process, so that we can force it to be approved for somebody else, or we can do a delegation to another user as well.